Carlie Brucia case. It was a warm Florida evening in February of 2004 when 11-year-old Carlie Brucia was abducted. She was walking home from a friend's house, innocently navigating the streets alone. That was the last time anyone would ever see her alive. The community was stunned and devastated by her disappearance, and an immediate search was launched to find her. However, despite the efforts of the police and countless volunteers, Carlie's whereabouts remained unknown for several days. Carlie Brucia was a typical 11-year-old girl with bright eyes and a radiant smile. She was full of life and loved nothing more than spending time with her friends and family. But there was something about Carlie that set her apart from the rest. There was a certain light in her eyes, a spark that hinted at something extraordinary lurking just beneath the surface. As a child, Carlie had a reputation for being fearless. She would tackle any challenge head-on, never backing down from a fight. Her adventurous spirit led her to explore every nook and cranny of her hometown, and she was always on the lookout for new and exciting experiences. But there was a darker side to Carlie's life as well. Her parents had recently gone through a messy divorce, and she was struggling to come to terms with the changes in her family dynamic. She often felt lost and alone, with no one to turn to for guidance. Despite these challenges, Carlie remained optimistic and determined. She threw herself into her studies, excelling in every subject and earning the respect and admiration of her teachers and peers alike. Even as the shadows closed in around her, she refused to give up or give in. For Carlie Brucia, life was a precious gift, and she was determined to make the most of every moment she had. The day of Carlie Brucia's abduction started out like any other. The sun was shining, and the air was filled with the sounds of children playing and birds singing. Carlie woke up early, eager to spend the day with her friends. She spent the morning playing games and having fun with her friends. But as the day wore on, she started to feel restless. Something inside her was telling her that she needed to go home. She said goodbye to her friends and set off on the familiar walk home. As she made her way down the streets of her neighborhood, Carlie couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She looked around nervously, but saw no one. She quickened her pace, hoping to make it home before anything happened. The next thing Carlie knew, she was in a dark, unfamiliar place. She was terrified and alone, with no idea where she was or what was going to happen to her. She tried to scream, but her voice was muffled by the cloth over her face. And so began Carlie's nightmare, a horrifying ordeal that would end in tragedy. The events of that day would leave an indelible mark on the community, and the mystery surrounding her abduction and murder would haunt them for years to come. The whole city was on edge, and a sense of unease settled over the community. Parents held their children a little tighter, and strangers looked at each other with suspicion. But then, a break in the case came. During the scene investigation, the police dogs tracked her scent to the car wash and found a surveillance camera that could have captured what happened. As the police expected, the surveillance footage from the car wash captured the abduction on camera, and the images were released to the public in the hopes that someone would recognize the perpetrator. The grainy footage from the motion sensor cameras was chilling to watch. It was like seeing a nightmare unfold in real time. The man in the mechanic's uniform was leading Carlie Brucia away by the arm, and she looked scared and confused. You could almost hear her heart racing in your own chest as you watched her being pulled away from safety and into the clutches of evil. But it was the yellow Buick that really stood out. It was like a ghost car, appearing out of nowhere and disappearing just as quickly. Who was driving it? Where did they come from? And most importantly, where did they go? The police rewound the tape again and again, trying to glean any information they could from the fleeting glimpse of the car. They checked license plate databases, interviewed witnesses, and combed through surveillance footage from nearby businesses, but no one could identify the driver or the vehicle. As the video ends, the viewer is left with a sense of unease, knowing that the innocent girl in the footage is about to be subjected to unspeakable horrors. The footage became a key piece of evidence in the search for Carlie, and it would be later used to convict her abductor of his heinous crime. As news of Carlie Brucia's abduction spread, the community was gripped with fear and panic. Parents held their children close, and the police launched an urgent search for the missing girl. Officers combed the area, searching for any sign of Carlie or her abductor. They interviewed witnesses and scoured the footage from nearby security cameras. The hunt for the missing girl consumed the entire city, and the police worked tirelessly to bring her home. But as the minutes turned into hours, and the hours turned into days, the search began to lose momentum. Despite their best efforts, the police were no closer to finding Carlie or her abductor. Desperate for any leads, they turned to the public, asking for anyone with information to come forward. The case had become a media sensation, and the nation watched in horror as the search for Carlie continued. As the police continued their investigation into Carlie Brucia's abduction and murder, they received a tip that would lead them to their prime suspect, Joseph Smith. Smith was a known sex offender with a violent criminal history, and when the police searched his home, they found evidence that linked him to the crime. But despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Smith maintained his innocence and refused to confess. For weeks, the police interrogated Smith, trying to get him to confess to the crime. They used every tactic in the book, from good cop, bad cop routines to outright threats, but Smith remained steadfast in his denial. But then, something strange happened. One day, out of the blue, Smith's brother suddenly asked to speak with the detectives. He had a confession to make. In a dark and chilling interview, his brother admitted that Smith told him he abducted and killed Carlie Brucia. He described in detail how Smith said he had stalked her for days, and how he had lured her away from the car wash. Smith's brother's confession was shocking, and it raised more questions than it answered. Why had he chosen Carlie as his victim? What had led him down the dark path of violence and crime? The community was left reeling from the revelation, and many struggled to come to terms with the fact that such a heinous crime could be committed in their own backyard. The trial of Joseph Smith was one of the most high-profile cases in Florida's history. People from all over the state followed the proceedings with bated breath, eager to see justice served for Carlie Brucia. The prosecution presented a wealth of evidence against Smith, including DNA samples, eyewitness testimony, and surveillance footage. They called upon expert witnesses to testify about Smith's psychological profile and criminal history, painting a picture of a violent and predatory individual. But perhaps the most compelling testimony came from those who had known Carlie personally. Friends and family members took the stand to describe the impact that her abduction and murder had had on their lives, and their emotional testimony left many in the courtroom in tears. Throughout the trial, Smith maintained his innocence, claiming that he had been coerced into making a false confession. His defense team argued that the evidence against him was circumstantial and that the prosecution had not done enough to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. After the guilty verdict was handed down, the courtroom was filled with a heavy silence. The air was thick with tension, and everyone waited to hear the sentence that would be passed down for Joseph Smith. As the judge began to speak, the room fell even quieter. His voice was low and measured, but there was an undercurrent of emotion that could not be ignored. Joseph Smith, for the crimes of kidnapping, rape, and murder, this court hereby sentences you to death by lethal injection. The words hung in the air like a weight, and the room seemed to grow even colder. Some people gasped, others wept, and a few simply stared in shock. Joseph Smith himself showed little reaction to the sentence. He sat impassively in his chair, his face a mask of stoicism. But those who knew him best said that they could see a flicker of fear in his eyes, a sense of unease in the finality of the sentence. As the courtroom emptied, people hugged each other tightly and wiped away tears. This sense of relief was palpable, but there was also a sense of sadness, of loss. For Carlie Brucia's family and loved ones, the sentencing of Joseph Smith was a bittersweet moment. They had finally seen justice served, but it came at a terrible cost. And even as they tried to move on with their lives, they knew that the memory of Carlie would stay with them forever, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the need to cherish every moment. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.